Welcome to another edition of Travs Talk. I'm Stephen Davis. I'm your host, and we're going to check in today with the manager from the back half of last season from 2019 for the Travs, Cesar Nicolas. Cesar, how are you today? Thanks for coming on.
Anytime, Stevie. Doing well. Thanks for asking. How you doing?
We're doing well here, just, sticking things out. No baseball at the moment. We haven't had baseball in our lives since mid-March. Take us through what you've been doing over the last 2.5 months. Where are you? What have you been doing on a daily basis?
Yeah, so unfortunately, no baseball for the last close to 10 weeks or so now. It's been rough. Obviously, we're used to baseball this time of year, but there's been a lot of positives come out of it too. Back home in Miami, I actually spend my off seasons here. I've been doing it ever since I started in professional baseball way back in 2004. But it's been a great opportunity for me to get back home, spend some extra time with my family, time that I usually don't get this time of year, but also just continue to focus on some personal development, some personal growth. So during this time, I think I've kept myself most busy trying to just keep growing myself, keep making myself a more helpful version of myself, I guess, in the sense of being able to help others, being able to help our players, able to help our other staff members, being able to help our organization. And mostly, yeah, like I said, just personal development, focusing on keeping my mind strong, keeping myself in good physical condition. Spent a ton of time on an exercise bike, believe it or not, stationary bike, something that I got into this summer with Pete Woodworth and Kyle Wilson, Matt Mastretta, some of the other guys we had on staff there in Arkansas. But it's been a challenge, but I think in the end I'll be able to say it's been a good challenge.
Is that keeping you busy, or are you really itching to get back to a ball field and be around guys on a daily basis?
Yeah, I think definitely itching to do that. I'd say it's keeping me as busy as possible. Like I mentioned, mostly keeping my mind sane. I don't really know what I would be doing without that, especially during the early parts of this quarantine where we really were stuck at home almost 24/7. But yeah, I'm really anxious to get back to it. I'm hopeful that we can start something back up soon.
So you're not managing this year, not scheduled to manage anywhere in the Mariners system. You're going back to, I guess, as I understand it, your old job as the Latin American field coordinator. Take us through what you do in that position, especially when you go out and start to get around the guys again.
Yeah, so it's an interesting position with a lot of different responsibilities, but also kind of open to opportunities to create. And so with that, I mean, there's not a very specific job description, but there's a lot of different opportunities for me to have an impact, which I'm really excited about. It starts with our staff down at the academy in the Dominican Republic. I think that's my biggest responsibility in terms of especially my personal sense of feeling like the most I can offer that group of guys is helping them to develop and to grow. Obviously, that extends into our Latin American players as well. But with this new position for me that I was going to be doing last year, and I guess started doing at the beginning of the season before transition to managing, gives me the flexibility to travel around and to visit with our guys at different affiliates, whether they're in Low A, whether they're in AZ, whether they're all the way up to Tacoma. Sometimes these guys go off to the different affiliates. I'm speaking of our Latin American players, and they get to be a little bit isolated at times. They might be one of 2 or 3 guys per team going into new cities and new parts of the country that they may not know about or be familiar with, and even going through different processes that just cultural experiences and things that they have not experienced in the past. So I think of our players that went to West Virginia last summer. We had a handful of them, which it was their first time playing at a full season affiliate, including Julio Rodriguez, who I think we'll talk more about throughout this conversation. I'm sure a lot of our listeners have heard a ton about, but his first year of even playing baseball in the United States. So you think about that, he's an 18-year-old kid who's living in West Virginia, first year living in the United States, and he's got to find himself a place to live, understand how to get around in that city, know how to get to and from the park, know what he's got to eat and what his options are, and those types of things that oftentimes get overlooked because we just focus on what they're doing on the field, especially as fans. You might show up to the game and just watch them play the game. But as an organization, we have obviously a big responsibility to help put put these guys in a position to succeed. And I think that in the Mariners organization, at least in my time here, we do a phenomenal job of really focusing on not just their development on the field, but also off the field.
It's a great point, Cesar. When we think of these guys as baseball players, and you think, well, when are they ready to move to the States to start playing? We think in baseball terms. When do they move up a level? And we only think baseball, but there's so much more that goes into it. How do you guys judge whether a player is ready, as you said, to come to the United States and play either in Arizona or play a full season affiliate and go out and, like you said, have to do all these things that are required of a guy on a daily basis in a different country?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it's a collaborative effort. I mean, lots of conversations that go on between a lot of different people and in different parties, if you will. I think that's something, again, that as a Mariners organization, I'd say we do extremely well is collaborating between departments and being able to express your opinion and express your voice, feel like it's going to be heard. And then, our leaders using those collective opinions and voices to make decisions. So with a guy like Julio, there's a lot of conversations that go on from myself to Andy McKay, maybe Luis Caballero, maybe Austin Knight, people that some of our listeners might not be familiar with, but, I'm talking about our manager down at the DSL, one of our coaches down there. You have just the input of a lot of different people in discussing what is Julio's capacity, how comfortable do we feel putting him in a position to be surrounded by predominantly English-speaking teammates, like I said before, in a new city, in a new country where he's not very familiar. And in his case in particular, the decision became pretty easy once we felt comfortable enough with that. His English proficiency is as far along as it is. He's a very bright kid, very capable of making adjustments and figuring things out. And when everyone feels comfortable saying, like, we can put Julio in this position, even though it's a challenge and an advanced challenge for an 18-year-old, knowing that he might have some struggles, but it'll all play a part in his development. So I don't know if there's necessarily a black and white system as far as deciding who's ready and who's not, but I think that the conversations among a bunch of different people is probably the best way of doing it.
It sounds like it's worked well in the past. And we'll get back to Julio in a minute. I think a lot of folks are fascinated by him. We hear his name come up a lot. He finished last season with Class A Modesto, but we'll get to him in a moment. I want to get to we'll go around the horn with you. 9 innings, 9 big questions I want to ask Cesar Nicolas. I don't think I've ever asked you these questions, whether it's in a radio interview or even off air. So I'm interested to hear your answers to these 9 questions. So first inning here of 9 innings, I want to talk about an event that happened after the Travs' last game of last season. Playoff loss in Tulsa. You got to tell 4 Travs players they were up to the big leagues, all of them for the first time. Take us through the whole process of that, how the call came from Seattle, and then how it went down after the game in the clubhouse after the guys had their season ended.
Yeah, that's a great one. Great start there, Stevie. I would say, let me just throw this out there and say certainly one of the most impactful experiences in my baseball career, in terms of just how awesome it was to be able to share that news with those players and just see the raw emotions. But I'll take you back a little bit. That process, I'm sure you're aware of, takes some time. You don't just get that phone call that morning and say, these guys are going to come. It certainly doesn't happen right after the game, but there's some conversations that are going on for some weeks about, what the transactions might be. I think myself, I can speak for the other staff members, and I feel like I can certainly speak for the players in saying that I don't think anybody in the clubhouse was thinking about that during those days. Obviously we were leading up to the playoffs, and then into the playoffs, everybody was really focused on the task at hand, which was potentially beating the Tulsa Drillers and advancing to the finals. That having been said, we go into that last game having a knowledge of these are the guys that are going to get sent up if, God forbid, or worst case scenario, we don't win this game. And so, you kind of want to be prepared for that in however you can. But I can give you the cliche, which speaking from my own experience was absolutely true. I did not expect that I was going to be giving that speech after that game. I thought for sure we were going to be able to pull out Game 5. I vividly remember our interview before that game, and you asked me how did I feel, and I think if I'm not mistaken, my answer was excited. There was an exciting buzz in the air. I felt like our guys were really ready to play, and we came out and we did. We played a great game. Tip our caps to the Drillers. They had our number that day, and they ended up beating us. But you go into the locker room after the game, and it's obviously a really somber moment. It's the end of the season. It's the experience that nobody wants to have. You just lost. You're in the playoffs. You feel terrible about it. I specifically remember Jared Kelenic coming up the tunnel, giving me a hug, and he was emotional. And I felt like, hey, what's going on? Obviously we lost, but he was so disappointed in himself that he felt emotional, and he felt the need to even apologize for his performance, where he felt like he could have done so much more to help our team, and he wasn't satisfied with that. That speaks to the character of him, and that's a completely different subject that we could probably talk about for a long time. But we're basically going through our farewell speech. The season has come to an end, and it's time to just kind of wrap it up. It was an excellent season. So many things to be proud of, so many accomplishments for a lot of different guys. But in the back of my mind, and I think Pete Woodworth and Kyle Wilson, if I'm not mistaken, were the only two other guys in the room who knew that we had this great news kind of stored away there at the end. So in keeping with tradition, ever since I've been a coach or been working in PD for the Mariners, I've been around Pete, I've been around Mitch Canham, who you know well. And we've always had a fun, interesting way of giving the guys the news when they were going to be promoted. And we thought, obviously, this was, a very special promotion and should be no different. So we kind of had an idea of how we wanted to run the conversation. But then we got into the conversation, and then it just kind of took off. It went on its own, basically. So, I gave my speech. I think Pete spoke, Kyle spoke. I think everyone on staff spoke a few words, and everybody felt the same sense of somber feelings, but gratitude as well. It was such a special group and so fun to be around. And then we opened it up to the players. Basically, does anybody have anything you guys want to say? At that point, a few guys spoke up, and it kind of transitioned over to Donnie Walton, who was always kind of a unspoken leader, team captain, if you will. Just such a dynamic person. And Donnie starts to speak. He starts to discuss just the emotions, the excitement, all of the great things that he experienced throughout the season. That just kind of led to just this feeling of it being just the perfect moment. And I remember looking over to Pete and just being like, "Hey, Pete, I feel like this is the time. Like, I want to say something. I want to tell him." And he was like, "Yeah, let's do it." So we just kind of took that momentum. And in that moment, I forget my exact words, but something along the lines of, how would you feel, Donnie, about continuing your season? Would you be able to do it without this group? Because Donnie spoke about how important that group was to him and how much they've helped him grow and all those things. And I remember him saying, and just true to form, he didn't feel like he could. He was like, "No, I can't do it." Just such a team first guy. And then in that moment, being able to tell him, "Well, you're going to have to find a way because you're about to go up to Seattle and help that team win some games." Just watching the emotions on his face, he literally fell down to the ground, and then watching his teammates mob him, the emotions, the energy, it was incredible. And then just down the list, we got to tell Kyle Lewis that he was going up to the big leagues, get to tell Justin Dunn that his dream has come true. And I thought, the way we handled being able to tell Art Warren the news was also pretty special and kind of fun at that. So in essence, Pete tells Justin that he's going up. Everybody's really excited. We got to do this same emotional roller coaster 3 times, essentially. Everybody gets really excited. There's tears flowing. People are hugging and just kind of sharing in the moment. And we kind of pretended like that was it. It was like, okay, great. Everybody, hit the showers and we got to go. But we knew that Art was still, waiting to hear the news. At least we knew we needed to tell him the news. He probably wasn't waiting for it. But we walk into the manager's office for about 30 seconds. And you can imagine Pete and I are standing on the back of the door, just kind of counting to 30. And we walk back out and we tell them, "Hey, we got one more announcement." So at this point, literally a few guys had already gone into the shower, Art being one of them. And I remember going over and saying, "Hey, Art, we got one more announcement. You're not going to want to miss this one." So he comes back out, and then Pete gives him the news, and it was just like he'd seen a ghost. I mean, to this day, I get goosebumps. Like I said before, just one of the coolest experiences of my career. Really fortunate to be able to share in it with those guys. And I think, it could have been any one of those guys and you'd feel the same way, but those 4 guys, it was very special to tell them.
It's pretty cool to hear those 4 guys talk about how that went down and their emotions of it as well. It was a cool experience for that group to get to go together because that was such a special group of guys last year on that 2019 Travs team. All right, let's move on to the second inning. Outside of that event at the end of the season last year, you were only with the Travs about half the year, but what was your biggest highlight for managing the Travs for the second half of 2019?
Oof, another great question. So many cool things happened while I was there, and you said it. It was only a half. Primarily getting to tell guys that they were going up, whether it was AAA. I remember Jake Fraley. It was a few days after I got there, being able to share in that with him. Just the cool things that mean so much to them and mean so much to the group. I think of a couple specific games. I think of that first Friday night game against Amarillo at home with the Star Wars. I believe it was Star Wars firework night. We had, what was it, close to 8,000 people in the stands, and it was just such an electric game. The buzz was in the air, like literally. Obviously, they were the best team in their division. We were the best team in our division. Both organizations just stockpiling, prospects and talent. You got just basically the best baseball players at that level going head to head, and that was such an exciting game. And then I also think of the game at Amarillo when we were down a bunch and we came back and won that game. Nobody ever gave up on our side, and everybody kept fighting back. You get a huge hit from Kyle Lewis late in the game. He was going through a little slump at that point. And just, I remember the emotions of those two games. It was just really an electric atmosphere, both of those games, and to see like the resolve of our players, to see how they were able to show up in two moments that were really important. I thought that was really cool.
All right, third inning. Flip it around now. What was your biggest low light from your managerial time with the Travs last year?
I think without a doubt, just not being able to advance to the finals. Obviously coming in and filling in for Mitch once he gets that awesome opportunity over at Oregon State. I don't want to say pressure because that's like a bad word to use, I guess, but there was expectations, I would say, and if nobody was putting them on me, I was putting them on myself. That's for sure. Mitch is obviously such a great manager and a great person to be around. He's one of the best leaders I've been around. And just knowing that he had set this standard that, I was going to come in and essentially be responsible for upholding. It was humbling to hear from him that he felt happy that I was the person doing it. But in my mind, development is the number one goal in our job. Getting to see those guys go up to the big leagues and starting their path on contributing towards helping our major league team win a World Series is the ultimate. But it would have been really cool to go to the finals and win the finals for sure.
All right, good stuff. We're through 3 innings. You got 6 more to go. You doing okay?
I think I'm okay. I'm going to get some water.
All right, here we go. 4th inning. Let's go back to the guy you've mentioned a couple times already, Julio Rodriguez. He's not even 20 yet. We keep hearing the word. He's special. What makes him so special? Well, we're going to see him at some point, I figure, with the Travs. He'll come through Little Rock at some point. What makes Julio Rodriguez so special as a baseball player and as a person?
Yeah, so I'll start with the baseball player piece because I think it's probably the easier one to speak of in the sense of like the tools are just right in your face. He's huge. He's such a strong physical presence, and he is a 5-tool player. It's fairly easy to see, but I think that the intangibles are what makes him special as a human being, and I think make him the possibility to just have an extraordinarily special career. You're talking about a dynamic person in the sense of his intelligence, the ability that he has to learn new things as quickly as he does. I rarely remember having to tell him things twice in the sense of teaching him things. He kind of tends to make adjustments on his own extremely quickly. He took it upon himself at an early stage in his career to master, not just learn, but master the English language, and he's done that. And he's just an overall growth mindset human who's I would say just kind of embodying that in himself and the way he lives. He's propelled himself to new heights as a person. He's continuously progressing his abilities as a baseball player, and his abilities off the field, I think, are endless. He's just so charismatic. He's genuine. He's caring. He's really the kind of guy that you root for. And then the fact that he's such a special talent makes it just an abundance of he's got just an abundance of riches. I don't know if that's the right way of putting it, but there's so many good qualities about Julio that I'm excited for a lot of people to see.
Great stuff. We look forward to meeting Julio someday. All right, 5th inning. 2.5 months since you've been at a baseball field. What's the one thing you're most looking forward to doing when you get the clearance to go back?
I don't know if we'll be able to do it, but like hugging my coworkers and my teammates, saying hi to the guys. I miss the camaraderie more than anything. Miss the guys.
All right, I hear you. All right, sixth inning. Best player you played with in your playing career, either college or professional.
Wow. Um, that's a tough one, and I wonder if some people might have their feelings hurt. But uh, let me see. I think the best, like the most talented player I've ever played with, I'd probably split. It's got to be a split. It's between Justin Upton and Carlos Gonzalez. Carlos, who was most recently a Mariner now. But yeah, just watching those two guys play, and they were about Julio and Jared's age actually when we played together. I started with them in '05 was my first season in the Diamondbacks organization. And then eventually '07, I think, is when Justin and I were on the same team. Carlos was on that team, the Mobile Bay Bears down there in the Southern League. You're talking about teenagers essentially who kind of had things figured out and were playing at a high level with guys that were 5-6 years older than them for the most part, sometimes even more than that. And just both of them in their own rights, 5-tool players, just the ability that they had to do certain things that it felt like were really hard for others and looked very easy to them. I think that both of those two guys, I would say, when I was playing with them, I remember feeling like someday I'm going to say, hey, I played with those guys one day.
All right, seventh inning. Tough question here. What's your favorite sport other than baseball?
That is a hard one. I'm a tried and true like baseball fanatic. I feel like even when I'm not coaching or playing, I'm watching, I'm taking in something baseball. I've always just loved it so much. I grew up here in the States, but I was born and raised here in the States, but my parents are from the Dominican Republic. I think that would probably have a big foundation for my love of the sport of baseball. I never really got into football, and so I'm still not huge on football. I guess basketball. I would have, it's almost like by default I'm going with the three major sports, and I'm picking basketball. But yeah, I think maybe just thinking about it, I don't really
play any other sports.
I played a little bit of basketball, yeah, when I was younger. I wasn't as tall as I am. I kind of had a growth spurt later when I was about 16 or so. But never played football, not even once, not even one year of organized football at all. I think my mom was probably more afraid that we'd get hurt or something.
All right, so you're a baseball guy through and through. Eighth inning questions right up your alley then. Favorite baseball movie?
Got a few of them, actually. I think my favorite might have to be For Love of the Game. I feel like it's a great movie and it's about baseball. That's kind of the way I would have to describe it. Obviously, Kevin Costner, unbelievable actor. I think the way that the story is told it romanticizes the sport, and obviously it's a romance movie. I was always really a big fan of that movie, but I think all the classics too, Major League, Rookie of the Year, all the ones that you watch, whether you're on a bus or something, you kind of can't get away from them. I think, we all love them.
I'm with you on For Love of the Game. Very underrated, and any movie with John C. Reilly playing a serious role, that's rare these days.
There you go. And he actually, I thought, did a pretty good job of being the catcher, the backup catcher, if you will.
He can pass for a catcher.
Yeah, I thought so.
All right, ninth inning here. Send us out. You've had all this free time. You've talked about how you've bettered yourself, but you got to fill that free time with some entertainment as well. Send us out with either a TV or reading recommendation for the folks.
I think if you haven't seen The Last Dance, you might be living under a rock for about a month or so. But if you haven't seen it and you can, it's just unbelievable. I think for us who grew up watching Michael Jordan and the Bulls in the 90s, we idolized him, and we thought, the team was just essentially the Beatles of our era. And in essence, I mean, I feel like you couldn't get away from the Bulls in that era. Everything was Chicago Bulls oriented, but the way it documents the behind the scenes struggles that they experienced and just the difficulties of being so great, I guess the adversities that it takes, you have to overcome and all that. I thought it was a really, really good insight into parts of the character of those athletes that a lot of us didn't know about.
Cesar, great stuff. Appreciate the time. Stay safe down there in Miami. Hopefully you're back on a ball field soon.
Thank you, Stevie. I appreciate it. Always a pleasure, and I'm glad you're well.
That's Cesar Nicolas. He was the Travs manager the back half of 2019, now the Latin American field coordinator for the Mariners system. This has been Travs Talk. We'll be back with you next time.